Week.
Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, details of a big management restructure at 7 West Media, plus the TV ratings year analysed. And we're going to be joined by Fairfax Media Commercial Director Tom Armstrong here in the studio. But first, 10 Network is reviewing the proposals for either a takeover or a debt refinancing that it's received this week. The free-to-air broadcaster hasn't released details of the proposals and has stressed that they may not lead to a deal. Well, let's get all the news on this with our co-host James Manning, editor and publisher of Mediaweek. So, James, just on this, I mean, what's happening regarding this sale? What do we know?
We know very little. We know they've had multiple expressions of interest in a transaction which might result in change of control. They don't use the term acquisition. I think the actual Broadcast Act says who controls the network, so that's the important part there. We believe there's been a bid from Discovery Foxtel Consortium at 23 cents a share, dropped down from their initial offer of around 26 cents. Number of concerns why they dropped that. We don't know who the other parties would be and how many there are. Speculation it could be two US, a private equity and a hedge fund, Saban Capital, I think, is the private equity, and Anchorage Capital is potentially the US hedge fund who might be interested in taking control.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because 10 even in the release warned about, speculation that's been in the media about this, but certainly the reports are, in both AFR and the Australian, that the Foxtel Discovery bid has been dropped from around the 26 cents a share to 23 cents. It's understood that 10 and Citi wanted something more towards the $800 million mark, 770 or so. So, why is it seeming to be dropping, and why is there sort of this seeming lacklustre interest?
It's indicative of a lot of the things, isn't it? I think we've talked a lot on the show about, is there room in Australia for 3 free-to-air networks? And I've always said, yeah, sure there is. But when you look at this, you think, it is pretty tough being that third player at the moment, and 10 is that. I mean, lots of concerns. They're off the boil in ratings. It'd have to be a pretty substantial turnaround to really get back into that mainstream game, lift that revenues. The regulatory hurdles that a international investor has to go through. The anti-competitive stuff if Foxtel gets involved, of course. And the cost of when people go through the due diligence and get into the data room, as they say, and get to look at the books, the things like the cost of the content deals that 10 has with its US suppliers, there's some concerns that they're pretty onerous.
What do you think the timeline could be on this?
Look, I think we're talking about this well into 2015, it looks like, because if the ACCC gets involved, that could take quite a while for them to have a proper analysis of it all and come back with a decision.
Got to ask you too, of course, the other big news that we've had as well, a management restructure at 7, and quite shock news really that Nick Chan, Chief Operating Officer role has now been abolished, and so he's going to be leaving 7 West.
Yeah, things have been close to a decade at 7 West Media. Most of that time, of course, the Chief Executive Officer at Pacific Magazines did a pretty good job there. Was sort of promoted, if you like, to a Chief Operating Officer role at 7 West Media, just 12 months ago, start of the year. So he's gone. They've decided, look, as a sort of a measure, as a cost-cutting measure, I guess they think, look, we didn't really need a chief operating officer. They're going to put in a TV operations person to look after that part of the business, and so Nick's out.
Any idea who that person might be? They're still to be appointed?
Yeah, look, Angus Ross has been mentioned. He's the current Chief Programming Officer. He's got a great background, would fit into that role pretty well. So, yeah, it's interesting. Peter Zavik has been promoted to Chief Executive Officer at the magazines, a long time Nick's second in command, the commercial director there, so he's a good choice to take that role. He's been like a director of magazines, which is virtually a caretaker chief executive most of this year. You would think Nick would have a pretty good anti-compete clause in his departure contract there, because you'd pretty sure Bauer Media would be very keen to have a chat to him, as they're just being run now with a chief executive out of London.
Interesting too, Graham Hill has left from 7 Melbourne.
Yeah, so it was a big day at 7 for those sort of announcements. Yeah, 33 years I think he's been with 7, currently a program manager down in Melbourne. And Steve-O coming back in to take over from him. The big court case earlier this year when 10 wanted to get his skills over, and he agreed initially to go to 10. changed his mind, decided to stay with Seven, and now he's going to be back and looking after Melbourne programming.
And this move, so you think it's all cost cutting? I mean, we know Tim Warner's warned.
Well, looking for efficiencies is what they say, but I guess it's another way of better deploying the funds they spend on their executive talent. Nick didn't have a background in television, and that's probably what they think they need. In the meantime, Tim Warner's going to keep those TV operational running the network duties.
It was interesting, of course, because the Seven West Media CEO Tim Warner only recently warning that the TV ad market's been softer than expected. So what about revenues for publishers? To get a sense of how this part of the market's faring, we're joined by Tom Armstrong, Commercial Director at Fairfax Media. Tom, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
It's been.
Because obviously you were appointed back in May. You began the job just 4 months ago there, and coming obviously from this background at Viacom and MTV. Just take us through, I guess, the decision to return to Australia and take on the role at Fairfax.
Well, I think Fairfax is one of the largest media companies in Australia, one of the most important. It's got a portfolio of iconic brands with audiences that really trust those brands and that are growing every month. We now reach over 12 million Australians every month. So to be a part of redefining a traditional publisher like Fairfax into a sort of modern media company was a really interesting, exciting opportunity for me.
And just give us a quick heads up on your exact role. So you look after the traditional, if you like, newspaper print sales, but now all the digital as well. Anything else?
Yeah, so I look after the Metro publishing division. So all the kind of Metro mastheads, SMH, The Age, Australian Financial Review, and a digital portfolio. So, all our digital assets.
Okay.
So just in terms of that, I mean, because obviously at the time of your appointment there was some sort of speculation, I guess, in the press here that perhaps with your background in TV that maybe it was a sign, you'd be brought in to really develop Fairfax's online video content and ad sales there. Just on that, I mean, how much of that is that a part of your role, and what's the sort of growth outlook for those online video sales?
Well, I think online video will be a big part of our strategy next year. It's one of the fastest growing parts of the advertising industry. Yes, I have a background in video, and it's going to be a big focus.
You've been doing a lot of, well, I don't know if it's a lot, but you've been doing some restructuring of the sales team this year. So tell us a little bit about that. And then this week's announcement about the brand solutions and client development, how significant was that?
Yes, well, very exciting. So we've announced this new division, Brand Solutions and Client Development. And really the brand solutions element is, it's really to focus on connecting advertisers with our brands, with our content, with our audiences in more sort of integrated, more innovative ways, whether that's through sponsorship opportunities or content marketing or native advertising. We recognise that marketers today are trying to understand culture and are trying to understand how their brands fit into culture rather than just trying to badge it. If you look at some very progressive brands like Red Bull, they're actually creating culture through great content, through great storytelling. So, creating content that audiences actually want to see and read is very much an exciting development.
You've got Michael Greninger running that, one of your sales veterans there.
Yes.
And how much of that is working with existing clients, and how much of that is developing people who aren't using you much?
Both. So we want to raise the bar with the solutions we're offering to existing clients, but we also want to engage with clients that aren't advertising with us, and that's going to be a big part of Michael Greninger's role.
Yeah.
And how key is that branded content to future digital revenues? As opposed to say traditional display or banner or
crucial
that sort of advertising.
I think it's today native advertising is probably the fastest growing part of our business. So we're seeing an environment where the display advertising, there's an oversupply of inventory in the display market with lots and lots of new entrants and new sites being launched. So I think being able to do more premium, more bespoke, creative executions around content, around brand is certainly that we want to get into, and we see as very, very sort of a core part of our business strategy.
Sort of something that's a bit scary maybe to the traditional Fairfax audience that thought that that's going to start filling the products, but it's only ever going to be part of the offer.
Yeah, that's going to be part of the offer. And if we ever do, you know, with native advertising, we have very clear rules and guidelines around, you know, how we integrate it into the content. It's very clearly signposted. So we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
Got to ask you about the print revenues and how they've held up this year, and I guess too, just on the print advertisers, are they taking up opportunities across all platforms?
So the print, print's been in structural decline for a couple of years now, but that has slowed significantly over the last 2 quarters. We're seeing a real sort of uptake in print, and we're really excited about print. You know, we're very bullish about its future. We think it still has a mass audience. It drives great results, and we're seeing some really encouraging signs.
Yeah. There have been any particular good news stories out of the print side of the business in terms of
Well, I think the big good news stories really are last year's profits are up 2%, print declines slowing significantly, and digital revenues. We're not far off digital revenues offsetting those print declines. So we're starting to get a lot of traction, and there's lots of things to be positive and optimistic about.
And it's not sort of just one or the other. You think they can? Well, they have to really both work together, both digital and print?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have an integrated team who sell both print and digital, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, and when we ask about outlook for next year, what are your feelings and what will your big challenges, do you think?
I think the big challenges really are the nature of our competition is changing so dramatically. The media landscape is becoming a lot more complex and a lot more competitive. So. Especially in the digital space. So we need to be a lot more entrepreneurial in our thinking. So that's going to require a cultural shift. We're going to have a startup mindset. We need to be more nimble, more agile. So I think driving those kind of behaviours in the team is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for us.
Yeah.
And just on, I guess, the paywalls, subscribers, that sort of how is that working as well now that asking the consumer to pay for the product? I mean, how does that affect revenues? What have you been seeing so far?
Does it impact your audience numbers too?
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, it hasn't impacted audience numbers. So I think the way the paywall has been structured has been in a way that we've managed to grow our audience. In fact, we're growing audience every month. And from digital subscriptions point of view, we're seeing a lot of growth, and it's certainly an area that we're going to be focusing more on.
It's been really interesting to speak to you today. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
Tom Armstrong there from Fairfax Media. We've got to take a very quick break here on Mediaweek. Coming up, we're going to get the reaction on the share market to the news surrounding 10.